That's
All right. Let's call the meeting to order. And is there anyone in the room for public comment, or any commissioners have public comment?
I actually do.
Go ahead, Megan. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to let everyone know that I had a look at the plans for the Glazer property.
Yeah.
And specifically, I was interested to see if and how they had incorporated our requirement of the specific plan to have front porches be kind of in front of the garages as you look down the street. And I was curious because the civil set of plans that were dated November 2024 and the elevations, the drawings of house styles that were attached with that were either ambiguous or in some cases looked like they did not have porches, or that the porches were not kind of in front of that sort of sight line of the garages. And so I reached out to I copied the chairs of the PC, but also Matt and Emily, and asked, like, what's the story? And then wrote a letter to be included in the packet, just saying we'd like to see more clear plans and elevations that show the porches, and both in plan view and in the elevation. So that's it. And I think that is sort of in progress. There's some meetings coming up around that. So I wanted to make sure to get that kind of in the works.
Yeah, the DRB is holding a public hearing on Glazer on January 14th, which is next week, right? And we do the mail out on Thursday, so yeah. So we'll include your comments.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Megan, for taking such a close look at that. I did read your comment, and then I read what Emily sent back, where it was very clear that we had been very clear about that. So I appreciate you following up on that. Anyone else public comment? Okay. Any comments on the minutes or edits for the minutes?
I made what I thought was a clarifying note. Oh, I know what it was. Sorry. It was about the village master plan update from Emily, and it said that she made updates from my comments, and I just clarified she had made updates prior to my comments, and then I gave her comments that were much more minor, and she made updates from those two. But so just clarifying that. I don't know if you can look at them.
Yeah, we can see the edit there. That looks good to me. Anybody else?
I'm not seeing it.
Is this not it? This red here on the screen?
Oh, you know what? Maybe that's my problem. No, I'm not seeing this share. Why is that?
Let me read it to you, Chapin. It says,
no, I'm fine.
Okay.
Just for the meeting as a whole, I do need to figure out how to see the share. Oh.
All right, while Chapin looks for that, anyone else have comments on the minutes?
I read them. I thought they looked good. They were on the brief side, but I think they covered everything that we had talked about.
All right.
I thought
Is
they
there a
looked good.
motion to pass them?
I'll move.
I'll second.
All
I'm
right.
abstaining because I wasn't here.
Yep. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And then Steve is abstaining. All right.
And I fixed my problem. I had the room pinned.
Oh, yeah. Which is nice because then you can see all the people. But- All right. Great. Whoops. Oh, no, I lost my.
Yeah, go ahead and turn it on. Okay.
Now we're going to do short-term rental ordinance. Take it away, Melinda.
Okay, hold on a second. So I took your recommendations from the survey and from our discussion the last time and drafted an ordinance. This memo just kind of gives a brief overview of that. And so basically what the ordinance does is it establishes a registry with a fee. Owners have to register their STRs and renew registration annually. It establishes a cap of 2 short-term rentals per owner and per property, with a waiver for existing multi-unit operators who have more than 2 short-term rentals. I don't think there's very many in Williston with more than 2. It could establish a cap on the number of short-term rentals in Williston. This is kind of a discussion point for you all. And it requires short-term rental properties to be owner occupied with a waiver for existing non-owner occupied short-term rentals until 2028. It establishes a position of short-term rental officer, most likely zoning administrator. Establishes rules for short-term rentals, including maximum occupancy, fire safety, trash disposal, parking. Requires the owner to provide contact information for a caretaker available 24/7 for times when the owner is not on site. And it establishes some enforcement procedures, such as civil penalties and revocation of registration for multiple violations. So if you would like, we can.
Linda, could you just, the only one there when I read that, the only one that I couldn't remember was the trash one. I'm obviously not opposed to that, but is that not like already a requirement? Like, do we need to call that out? Again, I'm not opposed to doing it. I just wanted to know.
I included it in there because, I mean, basically I looked at some other regulations. There are about like 3 or 4 that are extremely similar. And I just copied them because, you know, I mean, we don't have to have trash in there. We can take it out, but I just figured what's the harm? Let's see, where is it? So the rules are right here and. Right there. Yeah, so starting with owner occupancy. And then, what's going on here? Bugging me. Okay, that's, I think it's this. No, they're both off. No. Oh, the volume, okay. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Is that working?
It's working fine for us, but I don't know.
All right. I can still hear it a little bit, but that's okay. Oh. So anyway, certainly, you know, this, we don't have to include all of these if you don't think it makes sense.
I'm fine with the trash one. I just couldn't, that was the only one I couldn't remember. It's not a, I have no issue. Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, I wondered if we want to clarify the owner occupied requirement a little bit more. Oh, there we have it. Okay. So do we have something about like adjacent properties? I'm just curious what constitutes owner
Oh, it's in
occupied,
the-
right? Like if you
It's in the
own a,
definition. It's in the
okay, I guess
definitions,
that's what I was looking for, right?
Owner occupied means the property that contains the rental unit is owned and occupied by the registrant as their primary residence. So it's not the house necessarily, it's the property on which the house is located. So there might be more than, there might be an ADU, there might be a duplex there might be, a single family home where someone's renting out a room. Any one of those
Okay.
situations would be.
So
owner
just being in an adjacent property then wouldn't, if you owned
No.
two properties next to each other, that would not fly.
Well,
Okay,
if you own two parcels next to each other, it's some deal with how the sound is hooked up. We're getting that echo.
Sorry.
Is your speaker on, Melinda?
No, mine is not.
Oh,
That do it?
We can stay hear you guys fine.
we just hear us too much.
Yeah, there's an echo in the room.
I think you did.
Did you get it?
Whatever you did.
I just muted that one, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
whatever. I hope this hopefully won't be too distracting, but when you have a property, so if somebody owns two properties adjacent to each other, I guess as all one property. So in that case, I mean, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but
No, Melinda, I don't think we can do it that way because I think it has to be their primary residence. And you can't have two separate parcels as a primary residence. So it's got to be the primary residence. If they have something next door, that's lovely. They can make it into a long-term rental or do something else with it, but it's not going to fly in this definition.
But
which I'm fine with that.
If you have two parcels that are adjoining, then that becomes one single parcel. In which case, if you had two units on it, then you could theoretically rent one out. Isn't that right? Isn't that how parcels work? That like,
in Williston, yeah,
contiguous-
if there's two contiguous parcels owned by the same person, they're essentially one, right?
They're essentially one if one of them is non-conforming for the
Oh,
purposes
okay.
of zoning. So
All right.
there's a merger there, but you can own two adjacent, and I'm sorry for my hardiness on this. What's the provision in the draft that we're,
So it's the owner occupancy provision. So we're trying to figure out what the definition of owner occupancy means. And I just, here it just says the property that contains the rental unit is owned or occupied by the resident as their primary residence.
so you gotta
So-
define property.
right. So
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
asking if it was a contiguous parcel.
Just use
With-
the word, and we'll just use the word parcel.
Yeah.
Right?
Because then if you own the parcel next to the parcel you live on, you can't put a short-term rental on that parcel. If you
You
want
cannot.
to, you can
Okay.
merge those two parcels.
Yeah.
You could undo your subdivision, but that's a stricter way of doing it. But someone who owns two parcels that are next to each other and each one has a house on it. They are owner occupying one of those parcels. They are not owner occupying the other one. So if we just use parcel instead of property, then we're keying to something that has a little more specific definition.
Great, thank you.
And we can key that back to, or just clone over the definition from zoning.
Yeah.
I think we have.
That might tie into a question I had for clarity on the other document. One of the points, Melinda, was that it said that this could lead to essentially a cap on the number of short-term rentals. And I'm just curious, does that mean that we may make a decision to put a cap? I'm just trying to be clear here.
Yeah, so.
Or the action of having like the fees and so on could sort of organically result in less of those?
No, my question was, does the planning commission wanna like recommend that there be a cap on the number of annual registrations of STRs? Like, do you wanna say after, 50, we're not gonna hand out any more, we're not gonna like take any more registrations or something like that? Or do you wanna just not have that?
I had that point, noted to make a question on, it seems like if we have the restrictions that we do on owner occupied, that would be a self-limiting factor anyways, and if we are mindful of the fact of like the housing, it's like, well, everyone's house, not everyone's, but I'm being really general, like the houses are too big for the people living in them. You know, I wasn't sure, I basically, I wasn't sure if 3.2 is something that we wanted to do, or if it would be kind of self-enforcing with the fact that we're doing owner occupied and we're limiting the number that can be created per person anyways. Cause I'm not sure how we would decide this
Yeah.
number, but.
Yeah, I wasn't sure either.
Yeah.
I just want
So,
to make
yeah.
sure, Chapin, do you want to comment on this or do you have a different comment?
On this and other things.
Um,
On,
so
on this, go
I
ahead.
think oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, just on this very specifically, I don't think we should do 3.2 at this point, personally. I think
Oh.
we scrap that for now and watch it. And then if like all of a sudden at some point there's an issue, we could return to that. But I think that at this juncture, there is this, like you just said, an organic.
But shall we though put a provision to say that we might do that in the future if needed, or we shouldn't say anything at all?
The whole idea from my perspective, and I think I sort of proposed a lot of this, was to keep it simple and to set it up so that we wouldn't have to do a lot of administration. And I feel like that's more administration to start to worry about how many, and it's a longer thing if we start to say we may do that in the future. To me, let's keep it simple.
Makes sense.
So Shayla, what the if I may just make it two general comments. The first is that this is wonderful, Melinda, thank you. I could tell that you had borrowed from others because the language was careful and was good. And it mentioned things like making sure there was receptacles for coals from a fire pit, things that went way beyond what we were talking about at the meeting, but all of them looked appropriate to me. I do have a couple of questions when we get to violations at the end.
Okay.
Before that, I have two questions in 5. If we want to stick there before we move on. So in 5.3a, it mentioned explicitly bear-proof receptacles, and I thought that was interesting. Like, am I as a homeowner required to have bear-proof receptacles? It seemed like an interesting call out, and I was curious why it was so specific.
Because the other ordinances are down in southern Vermont where they have more issues with people leaving bear
Stuff out for
trash.
bears.
Okay, I mean, I think those issues can happen here too, but I mean, you know, yeah.
I thought the whole thing was like really, I agree with Chapin, it was really great to read it and be like, this is really well thought through and really clear. This part just seemed strange as like oddly specific in a way that wouldn't apply to normal homeowners.
I would have just said animal proof because we have dogs get into things and we have raccoons get into them and we don't have so much trouble with bears. But I just think it's so good.
Yeah, so that was my one thing. And then in 5.4 for parking, when it says, you know, you have to have this many per guest, do we want to provide an exception for those that are X distance from like public parking that's not street parking in the same way that, isn't there like parking changes, like weren't there parking mandates that were like in certain zones? Like, is there a different definition of an area that we could steal from to be like, I can't remember what the exact changes were that I went in, but like last year when they're like in these certain areas, you don't need to, you can change your parking maximums or minimums because you have some available. If that's a definition we could cite, or if it's just not relevant
I
enough.
think that with this, you can have, I mean, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for something like this, you could have more stringent regulations, because it's not like a zoning, it's not in zoning. And it's very specifically tied to short-term rentals, so I think, I don't know, I think it would be okay just to have, do whatever you want there.
Yeah, and
I agree that we could do it so that if you're near, if you're near a place with public parking or public transit, you might not need to have as much.
Yeah.
But also we could just keep it simple and leave it as is. So. I could see either way if anyone else felt strongly on it.
I wouldn't worry about this, making this too fine-grained right now, in that Williston currently doesn't operate any public parking that's available all the time.
Right.
So somebody could be near town hall, but you're not allowed to park at town hall indefinitely unless you work here. You're not even really supposed to park here overnight unless the town manager says it's okay. And all of our other public parking in Williston is street parking that's subject to our winter parking ban. So,
Yes.
you know, we did talk about this, you know, both Home and Be Home Act have some provisions where you're not allowed to require as much parking for residential if you're near public parking. We don't really have that kind of public parking yet in Williston. The other thing I would say about things like this is, these things can be rules that people don't necessarily have to give you a drawing and a plan when they come in and get their STR permit. They just need to acknowledge that these are the rules. So secure your trash. We don't want bears getting in, you know, you're generating more trash because you're turning over more guests. They may be, you know, buying takeout and dumping some more stuff. It tends to up the volume. So why is it different from a single family home? Well, there's just more going on. There's people who might not be familiar with stuff. So you're just telling homeowners, like, you might need to do some extra things to make sure that's manageable.
Gotcha.
And then if somebody's neighbor complains, we've got a rule that the short-term officer can point to and say, hey, owner, your place is all trashed. What's up?
Clean up your act.
You know, there's a rule for that.
All right. More questions or comments?
Yeah, and do you want me to go on to the end where it talks about enforcement? How did he?
I think Chapin said he had a couple of questions on the violations.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Do you
Chapin.
want me to jump in? Okay, so it's a little bit further down. It said that we can revoke their registration if there are three violations in a year. I don't know where that is exactly, whether it's up or down.
It's at 6.4, the first sentence.
Oh, right there. Good. Okay. Yes. And to me, we're only going to note violations when there's been a complaint and follow up. And I just wondered if it shouldn't be, if there are violations and there are violations that are big and violations that are small. And so if somebody, well, I just felt like it should be up to the enforcer to decide. There had to have been a violation to deny a registration, but I just wondered if we shouldn't put a specific number on it and just say if there's been a one or more violations, it may be revoked at the discretion of the officer. And I also thought it should be a violation. All we say about the contact is that they have to post a name of an address of a name of and number of a person, contact information for someone who's available if they aren't. We don't say that person that has to actually be available. So if a situation happens where there is a complaint and we try to investigate it and we can't reach the owner or the designated alternate person, that's a violation. But we didn't put that in the, we didn't put anything in that would let us enforce that, because we just said they have to post it. So I felt like we should somehow make it clear that it's a violation if nobody can be reached when there is an issue.
I mean, it says right here that they have to provide the contact information to the STRO.
Right, they have to supply that information, but what if the violation is that the person that they supplied the information on is not actually available? In other words, what we're trying to avoid is a situation where there's an issue and we can't reach somebody to address it. And just saying they have to post it and they have to tell us what it is doesn't say that it actually has to be a real contact that's always available.
Well, it says right there, an owner should provide all occupants and the STR with contact information for a caretaker who is available 24 hours per day.
Yeah.
Or two or more caretakers who provide 24
Okay.
hours.
Yeah, I think
So-
they could, I think you could enforce that. too.
Okay, so we could read that as being enforceable on the not available. Okay, thank you. And
Mhm.
great. And so I just wanted to make sure that it would be a violation if we couldn't reach anybody, and that it should not have to require 3 violations for us to decide it's a problem property.
Yeah, I mean, if other PC members agree, I can change that to just be may revoke or deny the registration of a short-term rental if there's been one or more violations at the discretion of the STRO or something like that, make it a little bit more.
That's my
less specific.
suggestion.
If the STRO, which is likely.
The zoning
that
Zoning
starts-
administrator.
is fine with having that discretion and like lack of clarity, then I think it's.
Yeah,
it's good.
I mean, I think-
If you like having 3 strikes, you're out, it means you're gonna potentially argue with less people. Who
I
knows
think we
though?
should at least make it 2. I hear you, Chapin. I totally hear you.
Yeah, it could
And
be a small
I'm-
violation or a humongous one, and yeah.
I do, but I think if Matt were always forever and ever going to be our person, then I'd be totally happy with that, with making it 1 or more.
Yeah.
And I would like him to be there forever and ever, but I do think that we should give people, like, if they're going to invest in doing this and they're going to, like, let's say they have an ADU and they like put money into it and they do it. And then like they have one bad guest who who is really loud, and you've got an STRO who's grumpy. Like, I don't want to lose their ability to rent because of that. So I don't know. I think it should at least be 2 or more, but I agree that it can be smaller and it can be big.
So if we include some discretion, and I'm okay with whatever you say.
I guess it already says may revoke or deny. It's not like an automatic you're out. It's kind of by nature includes discretion already.
Mm.
Just a matter if you want to bump 3 down to 2 or give some other.
You could even just say if there are any violations, and because it's plural. Oh no, maybe that doesn't work. Never mind. Anything's fine.
You could also leave it a little vague and say, the STRO has the discretion to deny or revoke the registration if the offenses are considered to be, heinous enough to disrupt the rules of the.
Well, I think, one thing is when you look at what this says in 6.4 about has a violation occurred that counts toward this 3, it means that the officer has issued a ticket. Which is not actually a small thing. It's,
No.
it's a fairly significant action. You have to go find the person, you have to ID them. And get their information. And then that ticket, the person it was issued to has either waived the hearing, or not contested the charge. Or the Vermont Judicial Bureau has entered a judgment of decision against them. So you have to give somebody a ticket. They either have to pay the waiver fee, which is basically the fine, and agree, yeah, I messed up. Or they have to go to court, and if they don't prevail in court, those are those 2 pathways. So there's always discretion, and we do this with zoning administration all the time. Just call someone up and say, hey, I got a noise complaint about your ADU the other day. I could give you a ticket for that. Just like not every person who speeds on 99 gets a ticket, not even everyone who gets pulled over gets a ticket. There is discretion in issuing those things. So, I wanted to clarify, Melinda, where it says revoke or deny. Is the officer issuing the permits at the beginning of this?
The officer is, yeah, is issuing the registrations or whatever you call them.
Okay, so revoke is like I issued you one, but you've got violations and I'm revoking it, I'm taking it away. The denial is I revoked it and you're applying again,
Yeah,
and I'm just saying no.
right.
That action is a little different than the issuance. So the issuance of the violation is covered by the way the Judicial Bureau works. Is there an appeal to the officer's decision to revoke or deny or issue a permit?
Not as written, no.
Okay, we might want to think about,
Well, and we've said people have to reapply every year. So in a sense, it's an annual process. I was actually wondering if for administrative streamlining, if we should say it's for a 2-year period when you apply.
yeah, I mean, I think some time limited things, so they're not hanging out there forever is fine, whether it's 1 or 2. But if we're in a situation, this is just something for everybody to think about, where the officer says, well, your thing ran out. You had 3 tickets in a year back when you were operating it, and I'm just not issuing you a permit anymore.
Mhm.
Oh, you bought another property in town, you moved away, I'm still not issuing you a permit.
Yeah,
You know, I think you're a bad actor, or I don't like you.
yeah.
You know, you would hope, as Shayla alluded to, that the STRO is even-handed and fair and acting in good faith. But we might want to think a little bit about, like, is that something where somebody can then go, do they go to the select board? Or are they able to take you to court and say, you know, I applied for this and I ought to be issued it and you didn't. So, you know, there's a really defined process around that for zoning administration, but I'm not quite sure what it would be
I mean,
in this case.
I did see, I think one municipality's ordinance had a process for appeals, and it was essentially the same as appealing a zoning administrator decision, so it went through, and I don't like the idea. I think it should be, if we can do this, it should be done through the select board, like an appeals.
I think what we're doing is more like some of the things that the select board authorizes the town manager to do. So I think, like, I don't know, back when we were issuing peddlers licenses, I think I was signing them. They're not a zoning approval. If I refused to sign one, or somebody didn't like that I signed one, I think that appeal would go back to the select board, but that might be something for us to just clarify. That's the nice thing about a ticket, is once you issue a ticket, you've just entered the Judicial Bureau, and it's like a traffic ticket. But you know, that there's a part of this where you're issuing a kind of a license or a permit. And we may want to check with council about that. I don't think it's necessary to perfectly resolve that in order to have a conversation with the select board about floating an ordinance, because what's really the conversation of the select board is going to be, should there be an ordinance or not?
Yeah.
Should it preclude, you know, non-owner occupied short-term rentals or not? The rest of this is, if we get marching orders to go figure it out, we'll go figure it out.
Yeah.
I do think that, given that the select board can remove the STRO at will, it said that the select board would be a logical place to appeal the decision to, but if we don't need to put it in now to get the select board's opinion, then we could just leave it out.
Just a question though, on the sentence, like the first sentence, like short-term renters or noise avoidance, is it like, are you saying about noise violation? Is that what the meaning is? The just 6.4, the first sentence. Is it violation of any kind?
Yeah, Mickey, that is confusing, but I think it does make sense technically. So it's one of these short-term rental violations or a noise violation.
Mhm.
Because a noise violation is not contained, like it's not written as a violation.
Oh, okay. It's a separate.
It's a separate piece of statute. Yeah, you got it. Exactly.
Yep. And there's a different ordinance.
Mention or noise, yeah, okay, get you.
Yeah, so, you know, that might be another way this could happen is if you just have someone who's got noisy tenants, noisy occupants. The police have been called 3 times in the last year and have issued tickets for violating the town's noise ordinance. STRO just has that record and says, that's it, you know, no more short-term rental in this location.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Melinda.
Yeah.
And I'm for forwarding it pretty much as is with the 1 or 2 things we did. Not having a limit in the town of how many there could be. And was there one other minor change? I can't remember.
Making that 2 instead of 3 in 6.4.
And then
Yes,
changing property to parcel,
yes.
okay. And
So-
then 2 more violations, okay.
Yep.
Do we need to do something official, you guys, to forward this to the select board, or can you all just walk
We
it
can,
on over
we
there?
can just work with the manager to come up with a date and let the planning commission know when that is so that folks can, we'll build time in for you to go over and attend with them. I did let the town manager know this was coming in our monthly update meeting, so, you know, Eric's aware.
Mhm.
And the cover letter is wonderful in that we're doing it we're not doing it because we want to regulate short-term rentals. We're doing it because we think we're going to have to at some point because of the problems it can raise, and we're wanting to do it early to avoid having the blowback and the follow-up issues. And so it's really helpful, I think, for them to understand why we're doing this.
All right. Thank you again, Melinda. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you taking all of our ramblings and putting it into something that makes sense. All right. Shortened chapters. We're back to our town plan. Very exciting.
Okay, so where are the shorter chapters? All right, hold on.
And I will admit that I did not figure out, like Hannah did, how to go in and actually make it say my name. So if there's annoying guest comments, they're probably mine.
Totally fine.
And mine.
In the meeting announcement, but what we're driving toward here is an encounter with the select board for probably no more than 45 minutes to an hour. To go over really the bare bones of the town plan and what are the actions that the town plan is calling for the town to take over the next 8 years. And we're doing chapter titles. So we don't have a lot of time. And what we want to bring to the select board is as sort of consolidated as possible and as action oriented as possible. And then within those, want to really highlight the actions that the plan calls for that might warrant further discussion or where the select board might ask the planning commission to add or modify or change course. So kind of like we did with the form-based code, where we really tried to highlight things for the select board and say, you know, here's the things that you might have a hard time with, or the things that you might have a difference of opinion about amongst yourselves or between you and the planning commission. We're going to see the select board again starting in the spring with a more full-fledged draft, and we want to hash a few of these things out early and often. So if you were to look at one of these shortened chapters, one of the ones that's truly ready for prime time, you'll see that basically everything exists inside of the boundaries of some kind of table.
Do you want me to share?
Yeah, why don't you just share, you know, like Williston's people or
Sure.
really any of them. And the format we're using, we would expect that what's inside of these table boxes to be kind of like the call out elements. and the things that might get illustrated with charts in the more full-fledged draft with the more narrative text kind of flowing around it, as we pull it back together. So every one of these, what Melinda and Emily and I are doing on a pretty breakneck schedule, that we're already behind on, but we're pushing as we can, is to do this format where we say, you know, what are 3 things to know about this chapter and what it talks about? You know, with a 1-sentence underline and then a short description underneath. Those are the ones for Williston's people. We're growing, we're gonna keep growing, we're demographically getting older, and we're becoming more diverse. Done. Like literally, that's Williston's people in 3 sentences. If you know that much, you know enough to start thinking about this topic. And then we want to tie into the public engagement side, so we're digging back into that. You know, people talked a lot about that they generally like each other here in town, and they like that there's a community. It's nice to hear. They value some of the unique qualities of the town. And they want there to be more housing opportunity for people. Housing kind of comes up through a bunch of these, right? So then, what I've asked the staff to do is at the goal level, define the goals for each chapter in the terms of livable, resilient, and equitable. So anywhere that the chapter has a vision statement, we're gonna consolidate one big vision statement at the beginning that's even more high level than this. At this level, let's just talk about Williston's people in terms of livability, resilience, and equitable. So the goal is what do we want to be here? And those are those statements. Then objectives, which means what does it look like? It looks like there's diversity on town boards and staff. It looks like there is equal opportunity in town. It looks like this plan itself is consistent with providing equity and advancing equity initiatives across itself. And then we have strategies and actions. So strategies are a little more general, actions are a little more specific. Generally, there's more than one action per strategy, and the actions and strategies get numbers so that we can track them and pull them all together into an implementation chapter at the end. So the implementation chapter would table out just the strategies and actions, adding in some additional attributes like, well, which year in the 8-year plan cycle do we think we're going to take this action on? Do we think it's going to cost a lot or a little, sort of like a restaurant review, you know, $sign to $5 metric? And who's going to do it? What departments or entities within the town or community groups within the town are involved in it? So we'll add that into that final chapter. So what I hope to hand the select board is 20 of these little chapter briefs, one consolidated implementation table at the end, and a version of that implementation table that highlights the actions that we really want to drill down with the select board and have that focused conversation with. So across the month of January, Melinda and Emily and I are banging out these chapter briefs and sharing them with you, making them available for you to drop comments on. And then we will have, if we can keep up the pace, we'll have all of this done in time for you to look at it at your first meeting in February, one last look, before we distribute it off to the select board for the second meeting in February. So then we'll go have that conversation. I'm sure it will spur more one-on-ones with select board members and staff and some back and forth, but we might not see the select board again until May or June with a more full-fledged draft that we're presenting them and asking them to actually set a public hearing on. And again, with the goal of completing that public hearing process by the end of August, when the current plan expires. So what I really am looking for feedback as you're thinking about commenting on these is, especially in the strategy and action world, are we capturing everything that ought to be here? And the one thing I would just caution when you're looking at it is, remember there's 20 chapters. Remember what those chapters are. We can redistribute the table of contents. There might be a thing you don't see in Williston's people that might be covered in the homes and smart growth chapter. or the town programs and services chapter. So just remember, it's getting really, really granular right now. Then we're gonna pull it back together. But we'll take any and all comments about this stuff and like, what are the actions we're calling for? And we are really trying to make sure the actions are actions for the town to take,
Yeah,
not like somebody oughta. But things really truly that the town would do.
I like this structure. It made it kind of logical and clean to read as I was going through them.
That was the hope, and a little faster.
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Cause we're gonna be dumping a lot on the select board kind of all at once. But that's okay.
I think so. Some of my comments, not in this one, but were probably going to be answered in the implementation plan. So I think that was the part that I was missing when I was reading it, was that will be kind of it'll shock everyone to know I really wanted the concrete who's doing it, when are you doing it by kind of stuff in there. So you can ignore those to the extent that those are just not relevant. But I do think that I did put a couple of places where something was an action, and that I think it probably maybe should have been an objective, or there was just a couple little things like that, just like moving stuff around, was the main thing that I put in so far. But I agree that the tables are very handy. So I like that a lot.
And try to like keep in mind the whole like sort of structure of it, that goal is like, what do we want this place to be, and then objective is like, what does that look like? And then the strategy is, how do we get there? And the action is like, what are we gonna do to implement this strategy? Like, how are we gonna implement the strategy? So it sort of like drills down like that. So even if like an action might seem really bold and something that the town's never done before, it might still be an action because it's something the town's got to do to get to where it wants to be.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And that's part of the idea of presenting it in this structure, is to say, if you really want the town to look like X by the end of this plan or by 2050, these are the steps we think you need to take to get there. Or if the strategy is act affirmatively to increase the diversity of town boards, I think we don't have do we have a compensation for board members action somewhere? We don't have it in 1.2, and I can't remember if we talked about it later.
Yeah.
Or if it was eliminate barriers, maybe up above.
It was somewhere in there.
Yeah, so thinking about saying like, so select board, if you adopted a town plan with an action that said we were gonna really take a look at paying people to be on boards or providing childcare at meetings, that's money. You're not taking a budget vote tonight, but you're kind of signing up for this. And it's a step towards committing that. And I think, there's some really good quotes out there about, if you want to know what a municipality is all about, don't read its plan, read its budget. And I'd like also in the implementation chapter to flag the items that are budget items, that are like, this is gonna cost the dollar signs, and like, it's money we're not spending right now, but could. I was really surprised. I took a look around at neighboring communities. Most of our neighboring communities do provide a nominal stipend to some or all of their volunteer committee members, which was particularly ones with big time commitments like DRBs, which I was a little, Williston doesn't for anything other than select board. And I didn't realize we were as much of an outlier on that as we were. But that's an example of how I would see this sort of drilling through.
Chapin, do you want to say something?
You're muted.
Chapin.
Sorry about that. I was trying to figure out how, when I was reading these, I had an issue that I couldn't figure out how to fit in the process. And it was this, under chapter 2, which is cultural things, it nice specific actions about celebrating culture, none of which reference Indigenous people. And as I was reading that, I was thinking, you know, it points out that there's no park in Taft Corners, and there's no a whole bunch of things like that. But nothing about Indigenous people. Then in chapter 3, which is cultural and archaeology, there's wonderful verbiage about Indigenous people in the long form, but in the short form of the chapter, it's all about archaeology, archaeological sites, nothing about celebrating or, well, there is that we want to make it more visible, but so you have to go to the bottom, that last one there. It's very dry about archaeology primarily, but then when you get down into the actions, there is an action that says to make Indigenous information more visible. See, it's archaeology, archaeology, archaeology so far.
Oh, you mean this one here?
Yeah, the 3.3.3 about interpretive signage. And somehow the in-between part is missing for me, which is there's so much research that has to go into doing that appropriately. And I personally feel like we need to have almost like an advisory committee on some of that. So
sounds like maybe additional actions or something.
Maybe. So, but what was bothering me is that to me, the Indigenous people who lived here are more than archaeological sites. And you could interpret what was there as making people aware of that what we got from the archaeology. And somehow it felt to me as though it fits in culture as well. And so I was just feeling like some things were lost in the summarizing.
Chapin, I actually wonder if it's in that the arts and culture chapter that we need to reference not what has been, not the history, but something about Indigenous people who live here now and engaging with people who live here now on any number of the topics that we've got listed here.
Yes, have a cross-reference in chapter 2. Anyway, and I bring it up more that I was trying to figure out how it should sort out, because I felt like something was missing, but I couldn't figure out. That would help. By the way, in line with this, I submitted a suggestion to the library design committee to delegate space for something for Indigenous people recognition or acknowledgement or celebration on the library green, similar to the Thomas Chittenden statue that's there. And not that they have to figure out what it is, but that they should allocate space.
I think we can find a way to say what you're talking about, Chapin, and find a home for it. I think one of the things that's been challenging for us is we had to divide this plan up into chapters somehow. And there are definitely things that could go in one or the other, or chapters that could consolidate. And what seems to be working best is to have the short chapters and then cross-pollinate them. I think when the actions all are consolidated, and maybe even the strategies and actions are consolidated at the end, we'll be able to move things around, because they'll have that number that'll let you, like, we won't necessarily put them in the numerical order that they showed up in the plan in. We'll try to organize them by subject matter, so that if you're reading about cultural resources and it's talking about art galleries, you might also be reading about signage and visibility for indigenous culture that exists today or something like that. So stay tuned for that as well. I think there's a mechanical way we can make sure those things aren't siloed into these chapters when we get down to the end and we're talking about an action plan. So I'll think about that too. But if we need to say something, if there's a step missing in the actions, like research how to, or research what we should do and then go do it, we can break that out.
That's good. And so I have a really bad feeling about us on the yellow team not having done everything we needed to do. We had good discussions and good ideas, but we had a really hard time taking next steps. And now Andrew isn't here anymore. And when he was our support, and I didn't know what you would like from us with those chapters that are basically blank in these short versions.
Well, I think what we're gonna do at a staff level is we'll try to at least make the short version of it, even if we've just got a blank chapter to start with. And brainstorm it, and then folks who are on the yellow team, but really everybody on the commission can comment at this point. And we'll guide you all through that. So as these short versions get done, we'll keep emailing this group and with links so you can come in and comment and we can edit. And then we'll use our next PC meeting. We'll circle back on everything that's done again.
Good. Because that's great, because I feel like I can effectively comment on that document, but I'm having a really hard time getting it started.
Yeah, the blank page is tough.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. But I think it has helped starting from the goal level and writing down through objective strategy action.
Yeah.
Because you can kind of say like, well, what's this chapter about? And it's like, okay, yeah, like what does this look like? If we're going where we want to go, what does Williston look like? How does Williston look different than it looks today?
Yeah.
Oh, there's signage that informs people about indigenous culture within Williston that's public and recognizable and visible in a way that it isn't today. Oh, okay. Well, how do we get there? Well, there's a couple strategies and there's a whole bunch of actions to get us to the point where that sign is out there and that objective shows up and that goal is being met. So.
I also have a question about, like, I know we need to do all of the chapters because they, we're required to include certain things in our town plan. I'm worried that with all of the actions, we're gonna get bogged down with things that are good to do, but not the most important. Like, if in 8 years we've done 40% of the action items in whatever the plan that we set out, just with the quantity that I'm seeing now, but we haven't done anything that increases the housing stock and makes, say, like Taft's Corners, more community area that increases the local businesses and economy and city parks and decreases car dependency and increases pedestrian infrastructure, then we haven't if we haven't made progress on those, whatever, all of us may think of different things, but we could have a list of 200 action items and we could ignore, I'm worried, what if we're okay, I crossed off the thing off the list that was put the sharrows on the road. That's nice, but also.
So I think we had talked, I definitely agree with you. And I think we had talked originally about at some juncture, once we have them, going through each chapter and looking at the actions and prioritizing them and saying, in this chapter, if you do anything at all, do this. Do this first.
Or was that ease of action item?
Well, I think there's a couple more columns in that implementation chapter that could lead us towards prioritization. So I talked about sequencing, do this in year 1 versus year 8. I talked about, is this easy or hard? Is this expensive or cheap? Another one is is this really, really important? Or are there other things that are more important? So we can, once we get it all in one place, I think we do a prioritization exercise here. We might not get all of that done before we go see the select board in February, but we get it done for the plan. Cause I think what I'm hearing with what Hannah's saying is so there's 200 actions. and you do 60% of them, but they're all kind of like missing the really important ones.
Yeah.
And I think maybe even as a call out for these chapters as we build them, there's one more bubble that says if you undertake one strategy here and you do all the actions under one strategy in this chapter, it should be this one.
Mhm.
And we might
Yeah.
come back to it that way.
No,
And here's why.
And
I
here's why.
definitely think we need that. I think that
Okay.
that was my expectation from the beginning or a long time ago when we first started talking about it, is that there is in each chapter we have all said, this is the thing. And then I think even we go further than that and we go through all the chapters and we find like the top 3 and we put those in the executive summary or up front, like, hey, out of all the stuff in all the chapters and all the priorities, these are the 3 that like for really real do it. Because I do think, Hannah, you're totally right that it can be overwhelming, and there's beauty in the specificity and the breadth, because there will also be a nice place here for a department head to go in and be like, oh, I can do those 3 things, like boom, 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 done. That's great. And like, we do also want that, but that's not, we want to make sure that we're giving real clear guidance on the top things.
I think it'll also help us to identify dependencies, because we may discover that if we do that one big thing in that particular family of actions, 3 others will fall along the way.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, it'll really help with that. So I like that idea. We'll do a call out. I'm naming it at the strategy level because the actions are sort of multiple steps, and I think that's maybe where we want to go. But like, if you pursue the actions under one strategy in this chapter, what is it? And then we do another round where we think about like the top 3 or top 5 that end up in that executive summary up front. If you use this plan for anything at all in the next 8 years, use it to do these 3 to 5 things. And they might be even a little bit bigger ideas, but like, you said, make Taft Corners mixed use and pedestrian friendly and livable. And it's like, that's a really big thing. And I can say from experience of the last few years, like, if you're not looking at those 8 years saying, well, gosh, what do I do in year 1? Oh, all the estimates I have for the infrastructure we need are 10 years old, and I need to go get new cost estimates. That's a year, and if you're not thinking that way, pretty soon it's year 7 and step 1 looks like it's going to take 2 years to get done. So, cool. Well, I'm glad this is helpful. I also hope it's helpful in terms of you're all being able to see, like Chapin was seeing, if there's something missing or there's something, gee, we're talking about cultural resources, but we didn't talk about advancing XYZ. And we want to hear that, because I don't know, when I'm writing a short chapter like this, I definitely scratch my head a little bit sometimes, like, well, what do we actually do about this? I had a really interesting conversation with the South Burlington city planner over the weekend. I ran into him and I was talking about writing an education and childcare chapter. And I said, we as a town provide neither of these things. And this required element was established in statute at a time when towns ran schools. So what do we do? And I asked Paul Connor, I said, what did you do? And he said, well, we wrote about coordinating with the school district, and we wrote about sharing facilities, and we wrote about the relationship between
funny.
growth and development and
So
school
did we.
capacity. And I said, oh, good, because I basically, if I'm doing what Paul's doing, I think I'm generally doing okay. But we were both saying the same thing about that quandary of like, well, we don't run schools anymore, and we don't run childcare, and we can make sure our zoning is really favorable to childcare, and we can even think about economic development strategies that might help people create childcare. But we don't operate it, and we definitely don't run schools. So
Interesting, yeah.
that has shifted. You know, that statutory thing was adopted at a time when you would sit down in your town plan and go, gosh, what are we gonna do about the school? How big does the school need to be? Where should we build the new school? It's like, well, the town's not doing any of that anymore, so it's different.
All right. Any other questions or comments on chapters? Thank you guys. I know this is just such a,
Right.
I mean, forget even the work, like Melinda's face said when we talked about the blank page, just the mental load approaching it is impressive. Okay, let's go to the annual report.
All right. Well,
We. Yeah, okay, we've got FY24. So this is due to Eric and Aaron on Friday. It's supposed to be a one pager. We're pretty close. Just wanted to make sure.
shrink the font a little bit.
Drop the margins, shrink the font, you know. Remember that this is the year that ended on the last June, which feels like forever ago.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Matt. I was like reading and I was like, this is last year. It is last year's, which is this year.
Yeah.
So sorry about that.
No worries.
It
So,
does have
you know,
it does have a section on upcoming items, and somehow the chickens were left out of it.
You know, to be,
we're bringing back chickens.
I think, I heard Sarah say, I don't know, maybe last year, she said she doesn't want to see anything about what's coming next year, so we could cut that out.
Yeah.
And that would shorten it a little bit.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then maybe if you need space, maybe some of the nuts and bolts of like what was up top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Maybe laser specific plan could be shrunk up a little bit.
Oh yeah, that minor revision was me, just grammatical.
Yes,
Yep.
and I don't know, maybe these amendments, maybe that section could be shrunk a little bit, I don't know.
I think you could get rid of this. Whoops. That was not suggesting. Hold on.
You know, once again, when we look at this, I think I say this most years, you all got a lot done. And should be proud of it. There's a lot of work in that year.
Mhm.
Yeah, because like if you deleted that sentence that was edited out, you might be able to condense to a single paragraph quickly there and.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we can get there.
Yeah,
But yeah,
we'll get there.
Mhm. Yeah, what size is this font? It doesn't say. All right, whatever. Figure it out. Oops, oh shoot, I just did something.
It's Newton's ninth law, conservation of syllables.
Okay. Want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, sure. Make it good.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it is hard to keep track of the 23s, the 24s, and the 25s in these documents and make sure you get it right and be thinking in calendar and fiscal at the same time.
Yeah. I admit to being not good at that part of it. I think we did it.
Is that it for the day?
Yeah. So you all have a bylaw public hearing coming up next time. So that'll consume a fair amount of the night, but we'll be bringing back more shortened town plan chapters as well. The other thing to note, if it didn't get noted before I got here, is The Glazer discretionary permit will be heard by the DRB next week. There's a staff report that Emily 99% drafted before she went on vacation, and that we'll be finishing on Thursday this week and posting up on the DRB page. I'll try to remember to email this group about it as well. Normally, our staff reports for DRB are all about how a project meets or doesn't meet or needs to change to meet the town's zoning. In this case, it'll be that plus quite a lot of discussion of what the project needs to do to meet the representations that were made during the specific plan application process and any special provisions there. So it would probably be good just for everybody on the PC that like this is where your piece of work from that project went and is going. The DRB hearing is slated, like I said, for next week. We are planning on that hearing continuing out probably a month from next week or more for the applicant to make some revisions to the plans. There's not anything really big they have to do, but there's enough little things that we don't just want to condition it that they go make it all part of the final plan set and the DRB never sees it again. It's the only item on the agenda next week, so it'll take up, it's the goldfish theory. The goldfish grows as big as the bowl. The item will take as long as the meeting is. But there won't be pressure on the DRB to take a vote on it that night. There's going to be a little bit of room to dialogue with the applicant about some needed changes on the plans and then send them back to resubmit and finish up at a continued hearing later in the winter.
Great.
Just another step in the process.
Go ahead, Megan.
Matt, is there, the DRB meetings, those are open to the public, right? And
Absolutely.
and also, and have a Zoom component, right?
They do, just like this.
Excellent. Would you be willing to send us the information about the DRB? I know it's available on the website, but it's really hard to find sometimes on our fabulous website. And I would like to try to attend that virtually. Thanks.
We're sending Megan to enforce all of our requirements.
Right. I'm going to argue about porches.
Well, I will say in regards to porches, there's a section on the staff report looking at highlighting and red pen circling elements of the plan that need to be brought into compliance with the porch garage relationship provisions of the specific plan. So not to spoil the preview, but Emily's put some work into that and made the applicant aware of the need for some changes on the submitted set regarding that. So you'll see that Thursday afternoon.
All right. Matt, that was one other thing that I did note, sorry, I'm just remembering from the chapters, when you said they all should be things that the town can do. I did make one comment on an idea around using funds to pay from the housing fund to pay for back rent and other issues to keep people housed, which is a very, very legitimate way to support people staying housed. So I totally support that concept. I don't think the town of Williston should go into that business. And so I just want to also note the places, I think having that strict rule around, is this something the town can do? While also thinking, is this something the town could fund or give money to X entity to do in Williston? So in that type of instance, making sure that we're leveraging our community partners and maybe funding them to do something versus standing up our own programming.
Right.
So that was just one caveat. When you said the bigger thing, it could probably be extrapolated from that one issue in other places. Like, let's not recreate the wheel if we're funding it or if we're supporting it. I mean, money would probably be the main way that would work. for most things, but
Yeah, I think it's okay to have actions that say, you know, find a way for housing trust fund money to be deployed into something that helps people with back rent. And you're still, that's an action the town takes, but it doesn't require the town to establish the program. So there's a little bit of just sort of the way the grammar is that, can make sure there's flexibility for that. But it also means then if there's like, let's say there is that third party nonprofit that asks to have access to some housing trust fund money, and someone at the select board meeting says, well, why are we giving such and such nonprofit money? You say, well, because we said we were gonna find a way to get town money to this effort, and that's the best way for us to do it, because then we don't have to administer the program.
Yep.
So
Yep.
always be thinking, that's really helpful for me, is to think about when somebody from the town would say, hey, I want the town to do this. Or a department head comes in and says, I'm proposing that our department starts doing that. The first question that should be able to be answered is, does the town plan support that? I'm writing a grant so the town can do X. Does the town plan say the town's gonna do X? And so if we wanna do something, the town plan should say that we're gonna do it. And that's my pitch to all of our department heads, is like, get your stuff in here. You know, when we talk about capacity, we talk about administrative capacity or meeting service demands, like the town plan should say the departments are gonna do that. You can always at least go point to that when you've got your funding request, your new position that you need, your grant you're trying to write, and say, hey, at a minimum, our town plan says we're gonna keep up with service demand. That's why I'm writing this grant, is so I can keep up with service demand. There are places the current town plan has been thin on this. It's been harder to write some of those memos about whether something that made all the sense in the world to do was supported by the town plan or not. And so having had that experience, I think the structure we're working in now is going to be way more useful for that.
yep, absolutely. Okay. Anyone else? Any other final comments? Thank you all very, very much. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Bye.
I
Bye all.
Everybody.